Nirvana Prakarana, the Transcendence, Chapter 3, the Story of Bilva Fruit. The sun shines mercilessly. The asphalt road radiates the heat. Amidst this uncontrollable heat, thick, dark nimbus clouds can be seen in the horizon. The very sight creates relief and hope in the mind that perhaps there is an end to this sweltering heat. From the direction of the clouds, a pleasant breeze ushers a physical relief. Slowly and steadily, the clouds start moving and filling the whole sky, making the atmosphere cooler. At the same time, the wind brings a lot of dust through the air. Suddenly, there is thunder and lightning, followed by a cool shower of rain which quenches the parching thirst of the land and fauna. By dusk, the rain stops as suddenly as it had started. The birds return to their nests to finally rest for the night, and everything becomes silent. A new sound can be heard from the surroundings, the harsh croaks of the frogs. No one knows from where they come after the rain and where they live during the drought-like condition. The scientists say that the frogs hibernate most of the time and come out intermittently with the outbreak of regular monsoons or even a casual rain. This observation was perhaps behind the naming of a profound Upanishad known as the Mandukya Upanishad. In Sanskrit, a frog is called Mandukaha, Mandayati Varsha Samaye, which means that which manifests during rainy season. The process of hibernation may have been seen by the rishis as the process of tapas or introspection. The rain has been attributed to involvement, so it is likely that the croaks of the frogs are the declarations of the truth, though rather harsh, which warn the consequences of involvement. If someone is told that his action or speech or thought is wrong, he may get annoyed with the person who points this out and may ask him to mind his own business. When a person is told that all his actions are unconscious, then the anger is more. For whenever a person wakes up a sleeping man, the sleeping man gets irritated for disturbing his sleep. And when the society is told that it suffers from somnambulism, its wrath can even exterminate the person or persons who bring in this awareness. That is how a Socrates was poisoned, a Jesus is crucified, and a Mansur is flayed and eliminated. It is an altogether different matter that after their death, the same society organizes religions in their names. The society is tradition oriented. It is necessarily so because otherwise it cannot have any control. Masses too are tradition bound because it is convenient to travel on a beaten track. To traverse a new path, an unknown trail, requires alertness on the part of the traveler. Since it is a totally new path, the past experiences cannot possibly be helpful. One has only the present and absolutely no idea of the future or where it takes him. The journey may end favorably or otherwise. One may be lost and be left alone without any company. One can plunge into spirituality only when one is prepared to become a solitary bird and not before. Carlos Castaneda gives 5 conditions of a solitary bird as declared by San Juan de la Cruz. The conditions of a solitary bird are 5. The first, that it flies to the highest point. The second, that it does not suffer for company, not even of its own kind. The third, it aims its beak to the skies. The fourth, that it does not have a definite color. The fifth, that it sings very softly. The preparedness for any eventuality can come only by conscious choice, and that is why only an infinitesimal number of seekers continue after taking to the path of spirituality, while for the most it becomes a passing or a casual interest, as it is only to get relief from the pressures of day to day problems due to involvement. For such persons, even this interest becomes an involvement. Nature of mind, or rather minding, because it is an activity, is to get itself identified with anything. One used to get identified with sense objects, relationships, or ideas before treading the path of spirituality, and now he or she gets identified with words like mukti, dhyana, maya, etc. Understanding this tendency of the mind is almost all religions directly or indirectly suggest the seeker to develop awareness. If one does some retrospection on all the stories dealt in this great scripture so far, a very clear picture of activity of the mind emerges. That the mind is only a peripheral phenomena which is at the substratum of everything we call the world. That it has its origin in the ahankara, the I-ness, which is nothing but an inconsequential shadow of the self at the center. That more we get involved with the periphery, the more strong is the I-ness and mine. That more strong the ahankara, more does one go away from the center. And that all spiritual effort is to leave the periphery and move towards the center. The center has been addressed by various names, each suggesting an aspect of limitless reality. There are three levels of activity for the mind. First is the level of the sense objects, for example, sound. There is a sound object, the process of perception, and the perceiver. The object and the perception are on the periphery, while the perceiver is towards the center. At this level, one tries to move away from the sense vibration towards the perceiver and to become one with the perceiver. When dealing with the activity at this level, one tries to eliminate the impure vasanas with the help of pure vasanas. That is where indriya nigraha, or control of sense organs, santosha, or contentment, virakti, or developing distaste for the sense objects becomes relevant. The second level is at the level of movement. While on the physical plane we move in space, and at the mental plane the movement is in time. Either the mind gets projected into past, which is nothing but the memory of the experiences. The pleasant experiences are relived, and the unpleasant ones are shunned or remembered with bitterness. Future is nothing but a projection of the past as a desire to repeat the pleasant experiences and to avoid the unpleasant. For most of us, there is nothing like the present, as we are either obsessed with the past or the future. And even if it is there, it is only so as a bridge between the past and the future. To arrest the moment, one is advised to be at the present. This is where shama, or sweet patience, and viveka, or discrimination, are of great help. And the third aspect of the mind is ahankara, or the I-ness, which is behind every possible activity. I act, I feel, or I know, and is at the substratum. This I-ness is the subtlest of the activity and is the primary activity, which is primal fall, if one may say so, the initial contraction from all expansive state. Again, this I-ness has three levels. The first is When one identifies with the periphery as my things or my actions or my thoughts and feelings. The second one, which is subtler, is at the stage of the tendency to get involved, which has been named as the Bhoga Vasana and Bheda Vasana. And the last is the subtlest, which is Asmita or amness, the beginning of duality and multiplicity. To curtail this activity, vichara is recommended by the wise. Yoga Vasishta tries to tackle the activity at all these levels. It suggests this study of scriptures and company of the wise for gaining an understanding into one's own nature. Most of the time, we suffer not only because of the external circumstances, but more because of the lack of understanding who the sufferer is. Once this understanding dawns, then everything unfolds itself towards fulfillment. Whenever anyone approached Sri Raman Maharshi in suffering and painful state, or for clarifying a doubt, he would always urge the person to find out who the sufferer or doubter is. Invariably, the person would be pushed into a state of antarmukhata. When one develops the capacity to look within, sooner or later, one is bound to discover that there is nothing like I-ness. There are different shades of activity, physical as well as mental. And what we have come to believe as the I is a non-entity like humanity, forest, or for that matter, universe. There are individuals, persons, or trees, or star systems. Factually, however, humanity, forest, and universe are only conceptual groups. So naturally, one will not find the ego. Instead, one discovers the uninvolved witness or mute observer of all activity which transcends all activity. Discovery of this gap between the center and the periphery is the essence of all that goes in the name of religion. Each experience has the potential to show us this gap if one is sensitive. Unfortunately, the identification of the ego with the periphery robs us of our sensitivity. For example, when one says my house, there is no distance at all because one has become the house. Similarly, it is with everything else, that is, relationships, feelings, and thoughts. This gap increases when there is the sense of loss or failure or disappointment. And that is why the ideal time for discovering this gap between the periphery and all activity and the center or the actionlessness is when one has some kind of pain and suffering. It is the suffering that gives us depth as it gives a shock to our identification and involvement. This sarga, with the request from Rama to sage Vasishta for continuing his sweet discourse. Vasishta said, that which may have been pleasant at one time can have the very reverse effect at another. It only goes to show that if something is longed for, it becomes pleasant. But the same becomes bitter when an opposite feeling of aversion is experienced. That is why one should transcend the likes and dislikes from the lower mind. The universe with all its multiplicity is only a creation of the mind. Therefore, the mind should be annihilated by destruction of vasanas or control of prana. The basic avidya has the property of contraction and expansion, through which the karmas have their birth and death. That is why one should annihilate the mind by the power of constant association with the Guru and the Shastras. The mind so destroyed by the control of prana or the arrest of fluctuations of mind gives way to the supreme state. Bliss arising when the visible things and vision are merged into one seer is all pervading reality. Through such experience, the mind is destroyed, generating infinite bliss. Such bliss does not have fluctuations, has no appearance or disappearance. The mind of such a jnani cannot be termed mind but only tattva or reality. That which becomes diverse is mind. With the elimination of vasanas and fluctuations, through control of prana, it becomes immaculate like copper transmuting to gold. Then one has become the non-dual without distinction between spirit and matter. All the distinctions are of the mind only, since the mind itself is only a shadow of the reality. The merger with the reality is itself transcendence. Giving this background, Rishi Vasishta went on to narrate a brief anecdote. A passing remark on the nature of avidya to be contraction and expansion is worth noting. The contraction referred to here can be taken as the process of involvement or identification which creates an impression and a reaction which is called as karma. And whenever a desire is fulfilled through the gratification of senses, an expansion takes place, though for a very short period of time. The expansion as such is the nature of reality, and that is why the scripture calls it as paramarthika or supreme. Unfortunately, vasanas do not allow one to remain in that expansive state for long, as there is the tendency for contraction achieved through further desires. The sage continued, "There is a bilva fruit of such huge dimensions that it cannot possibly be measured. It never decays even when Mahakalpa closes. Though it is the ancient of ancients, its glory is such that it is very soft and delightful. It remains unruffled even in the midst of the fierce storms and gales at the end of a kalpa. It is the seed of Brahma's egg. It is impossible to estimate the number of mundane eggs generated out of it and absorbed in it. Though ever ripe, it never decays. It is the essence of all fruits. The fleshy part of the fruit is unlimited and represents all-pervading nature of jnana. The marrow of the fruit is the fluctuating Chit Shakti which arising out of the fruit of Brahman produces heterogeneities of Akasha, the kalas or parts, the imperishable dharma, motion, etc. through the potency of its intelligence." At this statement, Rama commented that this allegory had been understood by him. Bilva fruit is the supreme state of Sat or Jnana, Ahankara, etc. are but the basic aspects of Jnana, which appears as one and the many, though it never has any basic difference. The marrow of the fruit of Jnana is extensive universe arising out of Ahankara. The allegory of the Bilva fruit having immeasurable dimensions and other impossible qualities appears far-flung. It must be remembered by the seeker that the allegory must have been used with a specific reason of helping those on the path. As has been mentioned elsewhere in this rendering, that the symbology was used not only for giving literal beauty to the scripture, but for the seeker to associate the truth with life. Bilva is a fruit of a tree commonly known as bale or Aegil marmolos. Its leaves are used for the worship of Shiva. The fruit, which is spherical in shape, has a strong flavor and is very sweet when ripe. It is also used for medicinal purpose. The author might not have used it as an allegory solely for this reason. Bilva has another implication. Bilva means a very small measurement of time. All of us are aware that the shortest moment is the present. Most of the time, if not all the time, we are either living in the past or the future, so much so, for us, time only means either the past or the future. Present moment is only that very, very narrow passage we use to travel back and forth in time. Consequently, we are seldom aware of the present. Curiosity, there is nothing like the past or future. Curiously enough, there is nothing like past and future, as past is only memories of experience and future is projection of desire in the mind, while the truth of the world and the experiences lies only in the present, in here now. This obstinate habit of being elsewhere in time and space is the root cause of all misery and discontent which troubles the humankind. Taking the example of working man's daily routine will make it more clear. When he gets up, he has already left for the office, with the result that he does all his work absent-mindedly. But since his mind was absent during the bath, breakfast, or his having taken the leave of the family, the mind tries to complete those actions by going back home after reaching the office. His work in the office suffers as his mind is not present there. Thus, almost all actions are somnambulistic. This is true even in our social behavior, which is full of hypocrisy. We are not happy to be with or to entertain someone, but cannot show our displeasure openly. So we put on a false smile and be with them only physically. Rarely, when there is some danger or an intense sense experience, we are available to the present, and we really live only during those brief moments. Due to the incomplete actions, the mind tries to complete them through an internal dialogue. This inner noise does not allow us any rest or peace. Even our sleep is disturbed as the incomplete thoughts get completed through dreams. The life becomes a tiresome race to catch the horizon, a mad movement from one desire to another. The Buddha, in his Eightfold Path, has given a very significant dictum called Samma Kammanta, or the right action. All actions are to be done with total awareness by being there totally and not just physically. This not only helps us to complete the actions, so the mind is not burdened with the task of completion, and hence it becomes more and more quiet, but the action itself becomes more and more efficient. Moreover, the mind cannot be in the present moment, and hence one transcends mind during the experience of here now. The Bilva fruit represents the supreme state of Sat, which is primary to everything in the universe. Everything is born in the present, lives in the present, and ultimately dies in the present. It is a homogeneous state representing non-duality, fragrant and sweet and delicious. That may be the reason why the sages chose to seek the origin or the center of everything, as it alone can give the unified perspective. They were very much aware of the deepening mystery as one starts moving on the periphery. They recommended the seeker to seek this origin or center before embarking on a journey outside. For this, one of the methods they suggested was to be in the mood of here now. Such a person who has learned to ride the present moment is bound to be ever young, as it does not have any burden of the past, since he has transcended the mind. To bring home this point, the author says, that though the fruit is ever ripe, it never decays. Different persons have given different methods to suit the different times and individuals. J. Krishnamurti used to say and advise the seekers to complete each thought so as to see and appreciate the gap of silence between two thoughts. But an ordinary man involved in the day-to-day struggle for survival as he is, it may be very difficult to observe the thoughts as he is used to only the gross things. Perhaps Buddha's Samma Kammanta is more practical for him. He has to only constantly remind himself of the work at hand till the gross actions become more conscious and aware and lead him towards the higher dictum of Sammasati or right remembrance or Surati as advocated by Saint Kabir. The truth of our being somnambulistic is harsh, but to accept it even with a little whimper is the first step in the direction of waking up. This acceptance makes us responsible for our present state as we stop putting the blame on someone else. The right action is the beginning of a wonderful journey towards realization of sweet and fragrant bilva fruit which is already within us, or we are of it.